play large career fairs and events. That's not going to change wherever I go. All career counselor positions are going to require that, whether it's at UMass Boston or whether it's at Boston College down the road, okay? Now, that still doesn't, those could be my career counseling resumes. And then maybe I have a resume built just for retail experience, because I want to just make some extra cash during the holidays. Those two resumes are going to look very different. Now, even within those themed resumes, though, like my career counseling resumes, depending on the job that I apply to, there might be some differences. And that's why I really need to look at the job description, because even though there's going to be some consistent things from job to job, different companies and organizations, there may be little things that they might highlight in their job description that they want you to also, make note of, and if you have that skill or qualification you want to highlight. So, for example, at UMass Boston, in their job description, they probably really bring home the idea that they need somebody who knows how to work with diverse populations of students. Now, if I was applying to a small private college in the middle of America where everybody from, the same town goes there, looks the same, acts the same, I'm not going to have to highlight the fact that I've worked with diverse student populations. I'll probably still have to highlight the fact that I've done project management, workshops, and counseling with students, but I don't need to highlight, the fact that I've worked with a multitude of people from a variety of backgrounds. At UMass Boston, I will. So that's why it's really, really important. Look at that job description when you're developing your resume. I usually tell students, highlight or underline every action verb that you see, every skill and qualification, and then make sure that you have those words in your resume somewhere, because that's how you're really going to tailor that resume to the position. Any questions about that? Okay. Last couple of things that are on this slide. So again, don't make a blanket resume. Employers can see through that. Your resume should evolve over time. It's going to change as your career changes and develops. Keep it up to date. Don't wait until it's time when you're ready to just jump ship and leave the job when you've had it where you are. Do it while you're in the process of being in the job that you like that you're doing, that you're not necessarily looking for a job. Because when you do that, you're going to be more aware and knowledgeable of the skills that you've done. It's really hard to think back about your accomplishments after you've already done them. Keep track of them as they're happening. Okay, so you're probably thinking, well, if it's a living document and it really just depends on the job, what I'm going to highlight, are there really any rules when you're writing a resume? And what I say is, well, it really depends. It depends on, the job. It depends on your experience. But there are some specific rules that you should really keep in mind. One of them, you want to prove it and you want to edit it. You want to have another set of eyes look at that resume, okay? Have a career counselor do it, have a peer career counselor do it, have a faculty member do it, have somebody that works in the field that you want to do, look at it. The thing is, you're probably going to get different feedback from different people because different people are trained in different ways. In the end, this is your resume. This is, like I said, your personal, professional first impression. So you're going to have to end up making the final call of how you want things to look. But definitely taking guidance from a lot of different people because they're going to have a lot of insight that somebody else might not have, okay? The resume needs to look professional, and part of making it look professional is making sure that it's consistent and organized for the reader. If they're taking only 30 seconds to read that resume, they need to even want to take those 30 seconds to read it. So to make them want to read it, it has to pass what I call the visually pleasing squinty test. It's a very formal term. Meaning, if you held a piece of paper with a resume on it across the room, and you had no idea what it said, you could tell just by the formatting of that document that it was a resume. You want to use quality, and I'll show you an example of that. So, last couple things though on this. One page is preferable. Now, with that being said, for every person that says a resume has to be one page, there's another person who says, I'm okay with it going up to 2 pages, as long as the information that's on that second page is relevant and important to highlight. That it's not what we just call padding the resume, which is just putting stuff on to make you look like you've got a lot of experience, okay? So keep that in mind. We'll talk about that a little further down in the presentation. And you want to use some quality paper. But here, for example, is a resume that passes the visually squinty test. Now, you guys probably can't even see what it says. It's blurry, purposely. But you can tell there's organization. You can tell that there's headings. You can tell that, you know, things are very lined up straight, that the use of bolding is probably to guide the eye through the page. So you want to make sure that it's very consistent in its formatting. Consistency equals professionalism, all right? Okay, so I want to go through each of the areas of an actual resume, and if you guys have questions about that, you know, about the different headings, let me know. But to start, when you're writing a resume, obviously you need identifying information. You need to tell them who you are, okay? And some people kind of get crazy with their headings. They make them really, you know, pretty and curly Q fonts. And I say, the only time that's really acceptable is if you're like applying to a graphic design job. Really want to just keep it pretty straightforward, simple, and not use a lot of space for that heading, because that's a space killer, and what an employer wants to see is not a pretty heading. They want to see, you know, your skills and your experiences, and if you're using all your space for your heading, then you're losing prime real estate to highlight those accomplishments. So you keep it really simple. You want to have your name. Obviously, your name's going to be a little bit bigger and bolder than any other of that identifying information, because you want your name to stand out. You want to have a professional email address. Your UMass email address is a professional email address because it's usually your first dot, your last name with a number after it. I usually tell students too, sometimes it's really helpful to have like a specific email address just for job searching. Like open up a new Gmail account to do that, because then you keep things separate from your personal life, and you can track things a lot easier, and so that can be really helpful. You can include your phone number as well as a permanent address and or a current address, depending on if you're an international student, or if maybe you're looking here just for school and you plan on moving home to another state or area of the country, okay? You can also include your LinkedIn or a professional website on your heading as well. Some people have, you know, examples of their work or their portfolio on a website, and that's a great place to highlight that experience. And with this heading, you want to make sure you use it on all your documents for your application so that there's consistency throughout your application. Again, that shows professionalism. So this is a really simple example of some of the things that we just talked about. You've got your name, your email address, phone number, a LinkedIn profile, and an address, okay? Now, a new wave that's kind of happening in resumes with identifying information is that some people are starting to get rid of their address, their street, you know, location, and they're putting a general search area, such as Greater Boston in this example. Now, the reason why some people are choosing to do this is because they feel it's a privacy issue, and they also don't want to be discriminated against based on where they live. So sometime, for example, say you lived in Boston, but you were applying for a job out in Worcester, which is in the middle of the state. Now, an employer could have this one opportunity that they're hiring for in Worcester, and there could be 300 applicants, and at that point they're just looking for a reason to say no to you, because they've got one position and 300 applicants. And so if everybody's equally qualified, one thing that they might decide for themselves is, you know what, this person lives in Boston, they're not going to commute out to Worcester every day, so I'm going to put them in the no pile. And that kind of stinks, because you might be just as qualified as someone else. So instead of, you know, putting that address on, people are putting these general search areas. So it's kind of a new thing that's happening. Again, it's personal preference. If you don't feel comfortable doing that and want to do the more traditional way of things, then do that. But if you feel that you could be, you know, discriminated against due to your location, then put on a general search term. Okay? Next section is an objective statement. So an objective statement is also an optional thing. An objective statement is really it's like kind of like your intro paragraph, as if you were writing an essay. You're telling the purpose of your resume. What position are you hoping to obtain? Really focus on the needs of the job seeker rather than your own needs. And you want to keep it short, direct, and concise. It's not like this long paragraph of, who you are. Now, some people will do a summary of qualifications, which is a little more longer. It's still very action-oriented in its language. It usually highlights a few keywords. But I can also use an objective can be just as effective and sometimes more effective than a summary of qualifications. It's also a really helpful tool for people who maybe don't have a lot of experience in the field that they're applying to. Because if you don't have that objective statement, and if you're applying for a job, say in environmental science, and all your experience has been maybe in nursing, they might not be able to see the connection as easily of the transferable and relevant skills, where that's something that you can highlight in that objective statement. And so then they have a better setting when they start to read through your resume. So here's an example of some of those objective statements. As you can see, they're really concise. They're general, but they can be really specific to the position that they want to apply to. Now, with events like career fairs, networking nights, you might want to consider leaving the objective statement off of your resume because you never know who you might meet or speak to at one of those events. And you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into one position or one area, especially if you're open to multiple areas. Again, you're going to change the objective statement based on the job that you're applying to. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're developing the statement. And you can be even as specific as writing the name of the company that you hope to apply to, that you're applying to in that statement, as well as the name of the position. Okay? The next section on your resume is your education. So with education on your resume, some people will say, well, shouldn't I put my education on the bottom of my resume? And the answer is yes, but only when you're out of school for a little while, okay? Eventually your education is going to become less relevant. It's 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Your education is not going to be up to date to what's going on in the field or in the industry. And so it is going to move down to the bottom of the page. But for now, as current students and as recent graduates, your education is some of your most relevant experience, and you want to include that at the top of the document. In that section, you don't want to include high school. You start at the undergraduate level. Any certificates can also be included. It doesn't just have to be PhDs, masters, as well as bachelor's degrees. You want to include your graduation date for all of these experiences, as well as your major and your minor. You also want to include your GPA if it's above a 3.0. If it's not above a 3.0, just don't include it. It's not a big deal. But the 3.0 is really the baseline for employers when they're looking at grades and considering grades, especially for internships and placements, especially for those competitive ones. You need at least a 3.0. Something else you can include is relevant coursework. You don't want to list your whole transcript in relevant coursework. You only want to list, 4 to 6 courses, the ones that are most relevant, obviously. And if you have a lot of courses that are relevant, then consider the more higher level ones, or the ones that are most specific or are specialized in areas of interest. All right. You can include honors and awards such as dean's lists and scholarships. Sometimes if you have a lot of those, people will highlight them in their own heading called academic awards and honors. That's perfectly fine to do. Same thing with the relevant coursework, people will put that in their own heading as well. Relevant coursework, to go back to that, that's one of the first things that we also take off the resume too if you're really hurting for space to highlight your actual work accomplishments, because really it turns into just keyword buzzwords to an employer. And a lot of the times an employer will know what courses you've taken if they see what your degree is in. So if you have a lot of work experience that's relevant to what you're doing, I'd rather you use the space to highlight that in relevant coursework. Okay? You can include study abroad, licensures and certifications as well. And then research projects. You can highlight research projects or any coursework project experiences. Those things can be highlighted underneath education, or you can put them underneath an experience section, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. Any questions about education? Okay. So here's an example. somebody highlighting their degrees, as well as relevant coursework, pretty self-explanatory from all the things that I mentioned. All right, so are there any science or math or technical computer science people in the room? No? Oh, okay, Sachin, okay. So just to let you guys know, if you have any lab skills, technical skills, those are things that you also want to highlight on your resume. Even if you have skills that are specific to the field that aren't, science-based, those are things that you're going to want to highlight as well, right off the bat. And kind of a list format is okay to do it, especially if it's a basic requirement of the job. The key thing, again, these are not skills like communication, leadership, management. Those are skills you're going to highlight in your experience. We don't highlight those in bullet point formatting just on their own as single words, because anything can say, oh, I have great communication skills, but there's no proof that you actually have them. It's in the bullet points and those impact statements underneath your experience section where you actually prove that you have those skills. So we're going to talk about that a little later. So then you really move into your experience with your resume. Experience does not just have to be paid experience. It can be paid, but it can also be volunteer work. It can be internships. It can be a family business, student groups, leadership roles, research projects. It goes on and on. The key thing is, did you develop a skill while you were there? And can you speak about this experience eloquently? Can you talk about what your goal was when you were in that role? What skills you developed? What was your impact? What were some of the results? What did you accomplish? Because the worst thing that you can do is if you're talking to a potential employer and they say, oh, I see that you volunteered at a children's hospital. Tell me about that. And maybe it was just a one-day event that you did, and there wasn't a huge skill development there because it was a one-day thing. It was just something you did for fun. It's not really great to say that to an employer, to say, oh, well, it was just something I did for fun one day, and yeah, we just passed out flyers or water cups to walkers who were raising money for the hospital. There's not a lot of commitment there, However, if you are able to talk about how maybe you volunteered at Children's Hospital, 2 days a week over the course of a semester, and you escorted patients to and from their appointments, worked within a team, developed great communication skills, that's something you can talk about really eloquently to an employer that you want included on your resume. So key thing is, you can talk about it, even if you weren't paid for it, as long as you can speak about it eloquently. Okay? How do you organize all of your experiences? Well, traditionally, some people will say, oh, I'm just going to list all my experiences underneath one heading called experience, and I list them in reverse chronological order. So that means you list your most recent experiences first, your oldest experiences last. You can choose to do that. However, sometimes it's more beneficial, well, it is beneficial, to highlight your most relevant experience to the job that you're applying to first. Now, sometimes it's hard to do that when your more relevant experience is older than some of your newer experience, because, like I said, we list in reverse chronological order. So how do we get around that rule? Well, we do different headings. We sometimes have headings that just say related experience, and then we list all that related experience underneath that heading, and then another heading that says additional experience. So you can do that, very basic, or you can also, make the headings really specific, so for example, maybe you were applying to a marketing job, and you had marketing experience, and so you wanted to highlight that. Maybe you wanted to work for a marketing department in an environmental science, field. And so you would have maybe a marketing heading, and you list all your marketing experience regardless of where you did it first, and then maybe you would have an environmental science environment experience. Heading, and then you list anywhere where you worked in, or did projects based on environmental science. So it really kind of depends on your experience, like I said, the job that you're applying to, how you're strategically going to think about how you highlight these work experiences. So, related experiences should be listed first, bulleted, and even within the experiences themselves, bulleted statements that highlight your related responsibilities and accomplishments should be highlighted first.